The city was alive with its usual chaos as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Streets buzzed with activity, cars honking, streetlights flickering on, and people hurrying home after a long day. Amidst all this, Officer Mark Delaney adjusted his belt, tightened his grip on the steering wheel, and prepared for another night on patrol. Known throughout the precinct as one of the toughest cops in town, Mark had built a reputation for being relentless when it came to enforcing the law. He didn't care about excuses or who you knew. If you broke the rules, he made sure you paid the price. Some called him dedicated, others whispered that he was too harsh, almost cruel. But Mark didn't mind what they said. He believed justice should be blind, and he prided himself on never backing down. That evening started like any other. Mark drove through neighborhoods, scanning the sidewalks for anything out of place. His sharp eyes missed nothing. A broken window here, a group loitering there. It wasn't long before something caught his attention. On a quiet residential street, he spotted a woman walking briskly, her head down, clutching a large tote bag tightly against her side. She glanced over her shoulder every few steps, as though expecting someone, or perhaps trying to avoid being seen. To Mark, her behavior screamed suspicious. Mark slowed the car and observed her carefully. The woman was dressed simply, a plain jacket, jeans, and sneakers, but there was something about her movements that set off alarm bells in his head. Her name was Lisa Thompson, though Mark didn't know that yet. What he did notice was how nervous she seemed, constantly checking behind her as though she were being followed. In his experience, people who acted like that usually had something to hide. Without wasting another moment, Mark pulled over to the curb, turned on his hazard lights, and stepped out of the vehicle. "Ma'am," he called out, his voice firm and authoritative. "Can I have a word with you?" Lisa stopped in her tracks, startled by the sudden sound of his voice. She turned slowly, her expression a mix of confusion and unease. "Is everything okay, officer?" she asked, her tone polite but cautious. Mark approached her, his hand resting lightly on the holster at his hip. Up close, he could see she looked tired, maybe even scared. But none of that mattered to him. All he cared about was figuring out why she was acting so strangely. "I need to ask you a few questions," Mark said, his tone clipped. His tone. "What's in the bag?" Lisa blinked, taken aback by the question. "It's just my stuff," she replied, holding the tote closer to her chest protectively. "Why are you asking me this?" Mark frowned. People always got defensive when they had something to hide, and Lisa's reaction only confirmed his suspicions. "If it's just your stuff, then let me take a look," he insisted, his patience wearing thin. Lisa hesitated, her fingers tightening around the straps of the bag. "I don't think I have to show you anything," she said firmly. "I haven't done anything wrong." Her refusal infuriated Mark. Over the years, he had dealt with countless suspects who tried to evade him, and it never ended well for them. Why should this be any different? "Listen, ma'am," he snapped, his voice rising slightly. "You're acting suspicious, and I'm doing my job. Now either open the bag or come with me to the station. Your choice." For a moment, Lisa stared. At him, her jaw clenched. Then reluctantly, she unzipped the bag and held it open for him to inspect. Inside were clothes, a wallet, keys, and a small makeup pouch. Nothing illegal or incriminating. Mark scanned the contents quickly, still unconvinced. Something about her story didn't add up. Why was she carrying so much stuff in a tote bag? And why had she been acting so jumpy? "That doesn't explain why you were walking so fast or looking over your shoulder," Mark pressed, crossing his arms. "Where are you coming from?" Lisa sighed, clearly frustrated. "I'm visiting a friend," she explained. "I left their house early because I wanted to catch the bus. Is that a crime now?" Mark ignored her sarcasm. "Do you have ID?" he asked sharply. Lisa nodded and handed over her driver's license. As Mark examined it, he noted her address. It was in a part of town known for higher crime rates. That fact alone reinforced his instincts. Maybe she wasn't guilty of anything tonight, but he couldn't shake the feeling that she was hiding something. "Get in the car," he ordered, gesturing toward the police cruiser parked nearby. "We're going downtown for further questioning." Lisa's eyes widened in disbelief. Are you serious? For what? I told you I'm not doing anything illegal. But Mark wasn't listening. He opened the back door of the cruiser and motioned for her to get inside. Reluctantly, Lisa complied, fuming silently as he slid into the driver's seat and started the engine. As they drove away, neither of them realized how much this encounter would change both of their lives. Back at the station, things escalated, quickly. Mark brought Lisa into an interrogation room where he began grilling her with questions. Despite her insistence that she hadn't done anything wrong, he refused to let up. Every answer she gave only raised more doubts in his mind. Meanwhile, word of her arrest reached City Hall, where Lisa's older brother, Mayor Robert Thompson, was wrapping up a late meeting. When he heard the news, his blood boiled. Not only had his sister been detained unfairly, but the manner in which it had happened reeked of bias and prejudice. Determined to hold the department accountable, Robert stormed into the precinct ready to confront the man responsible, Officer Mark Delaney. Little did either of them know, this confrontation would spark a chain of events that would force them both to confront uncomfortable truths, not just about themselves, but about the fractured relationship between law enforcement and the communities they served. The interrogation room was cold and sterile, its harsh fluorescent lights casting an unforgiving glow over the small table where Lisa sat. Her hands were clasped tightly together, knuckles white from tension. Across from her, Officer Mark Delaney leaned forward, his elbows resting on the table as he fired off questions with relentless precision. "Who's your friend?" he demanded, his voice sharp. "What's their address? Why were you carrying all those clothes in a tote bag?" Lisa shook her head, exasperated. "I already told you I was visiting my friend Sharon," she said, firmly, repeating the same answer she'd given him at least 3 times already. "She lives 2 blocks away. You can check if you want." Mark ignored her suggestion, scribbling notes on a notepad without looking up. "And why exactly did you leave so suddenly?" he pressed, his tone dripping with skepticism. "Most people don't run out of someone's house like they're being chased." "I wasn't running," Lisa shot back, her frustration bubbling over. "I just wanted to catch the bus before it got too late. Is that such a crime?" To Mark, her explanation sounded rehearsed, almost defensive. He had seen this kind of behavior countless times before, people trying to cover their tracks when they knew they were caught. But no matter how many questions he asked, Lisa stuck to her story, refusing to budge. The more she resisted, the more convinced he became that something wasn't right. After nearly an hour of fruitless questioning, Mark decided to take things up a notch. He leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms as he studied her carefully. "Look," he began, his voice softer but still firm. "If you cooperate, this will go a lot easier for you. If you're hiding something, or someone, it's better to come clean now rather than later." Lisa stared at him, disbelief etched across her face. "Are you serious?" she asked incredulously. "I haven't done anything wrong. I'm not hiding anything. Why won't you believe me?" But Mark wasn't swayed. In his mind, her refusal to admit guilt only proved she was guilty of something. "You have the right to remain silent," he reminded her, leaning closer again. "But if you do, we'll have to keep digging until we find answers. And trust me, that could take a while." Lisa clenched her jaw, biting back a retort. She knew arguing wouldn't help. This man clearly had already made up his mind about her. Instead, she crossed her arms and glared at him silently, her anger simmering beneath the surface. For the first time in years, she felt truly powerless. No amount of explaining seemed to make a difference. All she could do was sit there and endure the endless barrage of accusations. Meanwhile, outside the precinct, news of Lisa's arrest spread quickly. Word reached City Hall within minutes thanks to a concerned neighbor who recognized her and immediately called Mayor Robert Thompson. When Robert heard what had happened, his blood boiled. He had been working late in his office, reviewing policy, proposals for the upcoming council meeting, when his phone buzzed with the message. At first, he thought it was a joke. His sister Lisa arrested by the police. It didn't make sense. Lisa was one of the most level-headed people he knew. There was no way she would break the law. Still, the report troubled him enough to pick up the phone and call the precinct directly. After several frustrating attempts to get through to someone in charge, he finally spoke to a desk sergeant who confirmed that Lisa was indeed in custody. According to the officer, she had been detained under suspicion of suspicious behavior, though no formal charges had been filed yet. Robert listened intently, his grip tightening around the receiver. Something wasn't adding up. Without wasting another moment, Robert grabbed his coat and stormed out of his office. His mind raced as he drove to the precinct, replaying everything he had learned so far. Suspicious behavior? That vague term had been used far too often to justify targeting innocent people, especially women of color. Was this another case of racial profiling? The thought made his stomach churn. As mayor, he had worked tirelessly to bridge the gap between law enforcement and marginalized communities, pushing for reforms and accountability. Yet here was his own sister, sitting in a cell because some overzealous cop had decided she looked guilty. When Robert arrived at the station, the atmosphere shifted instantly. Officers who had been chatting casually moments earlier snapped to attention, their expressions tense as they recognized the mayor walking toward them. One of them hurriedly approached him, stammering apologies and offering to escort him inside. But Robert brushed past them, heading straight for the interrogation room where Lisa was being held. Standing outside the door, he paused for a moment, taking a deep breath to steady himself. Then, with a determined stride, he pushed the door open and stepped inside. The sight that greeted him filled him with both anger and sadness. Lisa sat slumped in her chair, her eyes red from holding back tears. Across from her, Mark looked up, sharply, startled by the sudden intrusion. "Mayor Thompson," Mark began, rising awkwardly to his feet. "Sir, I wasn't expecting—" "You weren't expecting me to find out?" Robert interrupted, his voice calm but laced with steel. "Is that what you were thinking, Officer Delaney?" Mark hesitated, unsure how to respond. "I was just doing my job, sir," he said finally, his tone defensive. "Your sister was acting suspiciously, and I had reason to bring her in for questioning." Robert raised an eyebrow, his gaze piercing. "Suspiciously? Care to elaborate on that?" Mark faltered, realizing too late that his explanation sounded weak even to his own ears. "She was walking quickly, avoiding eye contact and carrying a large bag," he offered lamely. "In my experience, those are signs of suspicious behavior." Robert's expression darkened. "So you profiled her based on how she looked and acted?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "Did it ever occur to you that maybe she was just having a bad day? Or that she might actually be telling the truth?" Before Mark could respond, Lisa spoke up, her voice trembling with emotion. "Rob, please," she pleaded. "I don't want this to escalate. Can we just go home?" Robert turned to her, his features softening slightly. "Not yet," he said gently. "We need to clear this up once and for all." Turning back to Mark, he added, "Officer Delaney, I suggest you rethink your approach, because if I hear one more complaint about officers targeting innocent citizens, there will be consequences, not just for you, but for everyone involved." Mark opened his mouth to argue, but thought better of it. Instead, he nodded stiffly, his pride wounded, but his resolve unshaken. For now, he would release Lisa, but deep down he remained convinced that he had done nothing wrong. As Robert led his sister out of the room, he couldn't shake the feeling that this incident was far from over, and that it would force him to confront uncomfortable truths about himself and the system he served. For Lisa, the ordeal was far from finished. As she walked out of the precinct with her brother, she felt a mix of relief and indignation. Relief that she was finally free, but indignation at how she had been treated. She glanced at Robert, who looked equally furious. "This isn't just about me, Rob," she said quietly. "It's about everyone who's been treated like this. We can't let it slide." Robert nodded, his jaw set with determination. "Don't worry," he replied. "We won't." Little did either of them know, this moment would spark a movement, a push for real change that would ripple through the city and challenge the very foundations of its justice system. The air outside the precinct was cool and damp, a stark contrast to the tension that had been building inside. Lisa wrapped her arms around herself, partly for warmth but mostly to steady her nerves. Her brother, Mayor Robert Thompson, stood beside her, his tall frame radiating a quiet authority as he watched her closely. Despite his calm exterior, Robert's mind was racing. He had seen injustice before, heard stories of racial profiling, wrongful arrests, and systemic bias. But this was different. This time it wasn't just another statistic or headline. It was personal. His sister had been humiliated, treated like a criminal simply because someone decided she looked suspicious. Lisa glanced at him, her eyes still glistening with unshed tears. "I'm fine, Rob," she said softly, though her voice betrayed the weight of everything she'd endured. "Just take me home." Robert nodded, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We'll go soon," he promised. "But first, I need to make sure this doesn't happen again, to you or anyone else." His tone was firm, leaving no room for argument. Lisa hesitated, then sighed. She knew her brother well enough to understand that once he set his mind on something, there was no stopping him. And right now his focus was laser-sharp, holding the police department accountable. As they walked toward Robert's car, parked a few yards away, reporters began to gather near the entrance of the precinct. Word of Lisa's arrest and the mayor's dramatic intervention had spread quickly through the grapevine. News vans pulled up one after another, their bright lights illuminating the night. Journalists shouted questions, microphones thrust forward as cameras rolled. "Mayor Thompson, is it true your sister was racially profiled?" one reporter called out. "What actions will you take against Officer Delaney?" asked another. Robert stopped in his tracks, turning to face the crowd. For a moment he considered ignoring them, but then he realized this was an opportunity, a chance to address the issue head-on and send a message to the entire city. Stepping closer to the reporters, he raised a hand to quiet them. When the noise died down, he spoke, his voice steady and commanding. "Yes, my sister was detained tonight under questionable circumstances," he began, his words measured. "She was targeted not because she broke the law, but because someone decided her behavior warranted suspicion. Let me be clear, this is unacceptable. No one should be treated as guilty until proven innocent, regardless of who they are or where they come from." The reporters scribbled furiously in their notebooks, snapping photos and recording every word. Robert continued, his gaze unwavering. "This isn't just about Lisa. It's about every citizen in this city who has ever felt marginalized or mistreated by those sworn to protect them. As mayor, I am committed to ensuring accountability within our police force. We cannot allow fear and prejudice to dictate how justice is served." His speech sent ripples through the crowd. Some nodded approvingly, while others whispered among themselves, debating whether this was genuine leadership or mere political posturing. But Lisa, standing quietly beside him, felt a surge of pride. Her brother wasn't just speaking as a public official, he was speaking as her advocate, as someone determined to create real change. Once the press conference ended, Robert ushered Lisa into the car and drove her home. The ride was silent, both siblings lost in thought. Lisa stared out the window, replaying the events of the evening, in her mind. She couldn't shake the feeling of helplessness that had washed over her during the interrogation. For hours she had sat in that cold, sterile room, defending herself against accusations she didn't deserve. It was dehumanizing, infuriating, and yet, she reminded herself, she was one of the lucky ones. Not everyone had a powerful sibling to step in and demand answers. What about the countless others who faced similar treatment but had no voice? Back at Lisa's apartment, Robert stayed long after she insisted he didn't have to. Sitting at her kitchen table, they talked late, into the night, hashing out ideas for what could be done next. "We can't let this slide," Robert said firmly. "If we don't act now, nothing will change." Lisa nodded, leaning forward. "You're right. But how do we start? People have been protesting these issues for years, and nothing seems to stick." Robert tapped his fingers thoughtfully on the table. "Maybe it's time for something different," he suggested. "Something more personal. A platform where people can share their stories, Not just statistics or headlines, but real experiences. If we humanize the problem, maybe it'll resonate more deeply. Inspired by the idea, Lisa chimed in. What if we organize community forums, bring together residents and officers, give them a space to talk openly about trust, accountability, and reform? Robert smiled faintly. That's exactly the kind of thing I was thinking. Let's call it Bridging the Gap. We'll invite local leaders, activists, and even some officers willing to engage in honest dialogue. It won't fix everything overnight, but it's a start. Over the next few days, news of the proposed forum spread across the city. Social media buzzed with excitement and community organizations rallied behind the initiative. Flyers appeared in libraries, coffee shops, and bus stops urging people to attend. Meanwhile, behind closed doors, tensions simmered within the police department. Officers debated amongst themselves, some supportive of the idea and others dismissive. Among them was Mark Delaney, whose suspension pending investigation had become common knowledge. Mark spent most of his days cooped up in his small apartment, replaying the incident in his head. At first, he had convinced himself that he had done nothing wrong, that Lisa's arrest was justified given the circumstances. But as days turned into weeks, doubt began to creep in. Late at night, lying awake in bed, he found himself questioning his own judgment. Had he really acted impartially, or had his biases influenced his decisions? The question gnawed at him, eating away at the confidence he once held so dearly. One afternoon, while flipping through channels on TV, Mark stumbled upon a segment about the upcoming forums. On screen, Mayor Thompson spoke passionately about fostering understanding between communities and law enforcement. Change begins with conversation, he said, his words echoing in Mark's ears. For a moment, Mark considered tuning out, dismissing the event as irrelevant. But something stopped him. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe it was guilt. Whatever it was, he made a decision. He would attend the forum, not as a participant but as an observer. He needed to see for himself what all the fuss was about. When the day of the forum arrived, the community center was packed. Rows of chairs filled the main hall with attendees ranging from concerned citizens to uniformed officers. Lisa and Robert took turns addressing the crowd, sharing their perspectives and encouraging open dialogue. Stories poured forth. One woman recounted being stopped repeatedly for minor infractions, while a young man described being handcuffed during a traffic stop despite having done nothing wrong. Each account painted a vivid picture of frustration, fear, and mistrust. Then came the moment when an officer stood up to speak. His name was Officer Harris, a veteran cop known for his willingness to listen. "I'll admit we've got problems," he said candidly. "Not every officer is perfect, and not every policy works. But we're here tonight because we want to do better. To rebuild trust, we need to hear your voices." The room fell silent, the weight of his words sinking in. Slowly, applause rippled through the audience. For the first time in years, there was a glimmer of hope, a sense that perhaps change was possible. In the back of the room, Mark sat quietly, watching and listening. He hadn't planned to say anything, but as the evening wore on, he felt compelled to speak. Rising hesitantly from his seat, he stepped forward, his heart pounding. "My name is Mark Delaney," he began, his voice shaky but sincere. "And I've made mistakes. Big ones. I'm here tonight because I want to learn, to grow, and to be part of the solution, not the problem." The room erupted in murmurs, some skeptical, others curious. Lisa locked eyes with him briefly, her expression unreadable. Robert nodded slowly, acknowledging the courage it must have taken for Mark to stand there. In that moment, Mark realized this was only the beginning of a long journey, but it was a step in the right direction. The community center buzzed with energy as the forum continued late into the evening. People from all walks of life filled the room, their faces illuminated by the soft glow of overhead lights. Some clutched notebooks, jotting down key points, while others leaned forward intently, listening to every word being spoken. The atmosphere was charged. A mix of hope, frustration, and determination hung in the air. At the front of the hall, Lisa and Robert stood side by side, facilitating the discussion. Their presence brought a sense of unity, bridging gaps that had long divided the city's residents and law enforcement. As Officer Harris finished his heartfelt admission about the flaws within the system, the crowd erupted into applause. It wasn't just polite clapping. It was an acknowledgement of vulnerability, a recognition that progress could only begin when people were willing to admit their shortcomings. For many attendees, this moment felt like a turning point, a rare opportunity to confront issues that had festered for decades without resolution. But then came Mark Delaney. Standing awkwardly near the back of the room, he hesitated before stepping forward. His palms were sweaty, his heart racing as he walked toward the microphone at the front. Every eye in the room turned to him, some curious, others skeptical. He cleared his throat, trying to steady his nerves. "My name is Mark Delaney," he began, his voice trembling slightly, "and I'm the officer who arrested Lisa Thompson." A hush fell over the audience. Conversation ceased, and even the faint hum of the air conditioning seemed to fade. All eyes were on Mark now, scrutinizing his every move. Lisa shifted uncomfortably in her seat, unsure of what to expect. Robert crossed his arms, his expression unreadable but alert, ready to intervene if necessary. "I know why you're looking at me like this," Mark continued, his gaze scanning the room. "I don't blame you. What I did, it wasn't right. I let my assumptions cloud my judgment, and because of that, I treated someone unfairly." He paused, swallowing hard. Lisa didn't deserve what happened to her that night. No one does. For a moment, silence lingered in the room. Then slowly, Lisa raised her hand. Her gesture caught everyone off guard, including Mark. She stood up, her posture calm but resolute. Walking to the front, she faced him directly, her brown eyes meeting his blue ones. There was no anger in her expression, just quiet strength. "Thank you for saying that," she said softly, her voice carrying across the silent hall. "It takes courage to admit when you're wrong, especially in front of so many people. But this isn't just about me or you. It's about how we move forward together." Her words struck a chord with the audience. A few people nodded in agreement, while others exchanged glances, clearly moved by the exchange. Mark looked down, embarrassed but also relieved. He hadn't expected forgiveness, not so soon. Yet here was Lisa, extending an olive branch, inviting him to join the conversation rather than shutting him out. Robert watched the interaction closely, his initial skepticism giving way to cautious optimism. He knew moments like these were rare, fragile, yet powerful. They had the potential to spark real change, but only if nurtured carefully. Taking a step forward, he addressed the crowd. "This is exactly why we're here tonight," he said, his tone firm but encouraging. "To listen, to learn, and to hold each other accountable. If we can have honest conversations like this, if we can acknowledge our mistakes and work toward solutions, we can build something stronger than fear or mistrust." His words resonated deeply, prompting more people to speak up. A young woman in her 20s stood up, tears streaming down her face as she recounted being stopped multiple times for minor infractions. "Every time it happens, I feel smaller," she admitted. "Like I don't matter. But seeing this tonight gives me hope that things can get better." An older man followed, sharing how his teenage son had been detained unjustly during a routine traffic stop. "He came home shaken, scared to leave the house again," the man explained. "We need officers who see us as human beings, not suspects." Each story added another layer to the complex web of emotions swirling in the room. Officers listened, intently, some visibly moved by the raw honesty of the speakers. One by one, they began responding, offering apologies and pledging to do better. It wasn't perfect, far from it, but it was a start. As the forum drew to a close, Lisa and Robert thanked everyone for participating. Exhaustion lined their faces, but their spirits remained high. Outside, reporters waited eagerly for statements, cameras flashing as participants filed out of the building. Lisa paused briefly to address them, emphasizing the importance of continuing these dialogues. "Tonight showed us that change is possible," she said, her voice strong despite her fatigue. but it's going to take all of us working together to make it happen. Mark lingered behind, watching as the crowd dispersed. He felt a strange mix of emotions, relief, shame, and a flicker of hope. Approaching Lisa cautiously, he extended his hand. "I meant what I said earlier," he told her. "I want to be part of the solution." Lisa hesitated for a split second before shaking his hand. "Then prove it," she replied simply. "Show us that you're serious about change." With those words, Mark realized the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Rebuilding trust would take time, effort, and countless uncomfortable conversations. But for the first time in years, he felt motivated, not by duty or obligation, but by a genuine desire to make amends. Back at the precinct the following week, discussions about the forum dominated the break room. Some officers dismissed it as a publicity stunt, while others praised its impact. Chief Daniels, however, saw an opportunity. Calling a department-wide meeting, he announced plans to implement mandatory training sessions focused on implicit bias and de-escalation techniques. "Change starts with us," he declared. "If we want the community to trust us, we need to earn it." Meanwhile, Lisa and Robert launched a series of follow-up initiatives, including mentorship programs connecting officers with local youth and workshops designed to foster mutual understanding. Slowly but surely, seeds of transformation began taking root. It wasn't a magic fix. There were setbacks, misunderstandings, and moments of doubt, but the momentum was undeniable. In the months that followed, Mark found himself volunteering for community outreach programs, attending neighborhood meetings, and engaging in conversations he once avoided. Each interaction challenged his preconceptions, forcing him to confront uncomfortable truths about himself and the world around him. Though the journey was far from over, he knew one thing for certain: silence and denial weren't options anymore. Change required action, and he was determined to play his part. Weeks turned into months, and the ripple effects of that first forum began to spread throughout the city. The initial burst of energy had transformed into a steady momentum, with more residents and officers participating in follow-up events. Lisa and Robert worked tirelessly to keep the movement alive, organizing workshops, panel discussions, and community service projects. Their efforts weren't glamorous or flashy. They were rooted in small, consistent actions aimed at fostering trust and understanding. But it was these incremental changes that started to chip away at decades of mistrust between law enforcement and marginalized communities. Mark Delaney became one of the most unexpected faces of this evolving effort. At first, his involvement drew skepticism from both sides. Residents questioned whether he was sincere, while some fellow officers accused him of going soft or seeking redemption for selfish reasons. Mark didn't blame them. He knew he had earned their doubts through his actions, or rather, his lack of them in the past. Still, he showed up day after day, determined to prove that he was serious about making amends. One of the programs he volunteered for was a mentoring initiative called Cops and Kids, designed to connect police officers with local youth. Every Saturday morning, a group of officers would gather at a community center to engage in activities like basketball games, art projects, and career counseling sessions. For many kids, the idea of spending time with cops felt strange, even intimidating. They had grown up hearing stories of unfair treatment, harsh interrogations, and arrests that seemed arbitrary. Breaking down those walls took patience and a willingness to listen without judgment. During one such session, Mark found himself paired with a 12-year-old boy named Jamal. Jamal was quiet, keeping mostly to himself as other kids laughed and played around him. When Mark approached him, offering a friendly smile, Jamal barely glanced up. "You don't have to talk if you don't want to," Mark said gently, sitting beside him on a bench. "But I'm here if you need anything." Jamal shrugged, fiddling with the laces of his sneakers. After a few minutes of awkward silence, he finally spoke. "Why are you here?" he asked bluntly. "Are you trying to spy on us or something?" Mark chuckled softly, shaking his head. "Nope, no spying. Just trying to help where I can." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Look, I know not everyone has good experiences with police officers. Some of my coworkers haven't always done the right thing, including me. But I want to change that. If we can start talking instead of assuming maybe things will get better. Jamal studied him for a moment, then nodded slowly. Okay, he said simply. Over the next hour, they played a game of one-on-one basketball, laughing as they stumbled over missed shots and clumsy passes. By the end of the session, Jamal's guard had lowered slightly. Though he still kept his distance emotionally, Mark could see a flicker of curiosity in the boy's eyes, a tiny crack in the wall of distrust. These moments, though small, gave Mark a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. Each interaction reminded him why he had joined the force in the first place, to protect and serve. Somewhere along the way, he had lost sight of that mission, letting biases and assumptions guide his decisions. Now, he was rediscovering it, not through grand gestures, but through genuine connections with people who had every reason to doubt him. Meanwhile, Lisa and Robert continued to push for systemic reforms within the department. With input from community members, they drafted a comprehensive plan addressing issues like racial profiling, excessive use of force, and accountability measures. One of the key components of their proposal was the creation of an independent oversight committee tasked with reviewing complaints against officers. This idea faced significant resistance from higher-ups in the police union, who argued that it undermined the authority of internal investigations. But Robert refused to back down. This isn't about undermining anyone, he explained during a heated city council meeting. It's about transparency. If we truly believe in justice, we shouldn't fear scrutiny. In fact, we should welcome it. His argument resonated with many council members, leading to a narrow vote in favor of establishing the committee. While the victory was hard-fought, it marked a crucial step forward. For the first time, civilians would have a direct role in holding law enforcement accountable, a move that sent shockwaves through the precinct. Back in the neighborhoods, the impact of these changes began to surface in subtle ways. Residents reported feeling safer approaching officers with concerns, knowing there was now a system in place to address grievances. Officers, too, noticed shifts in how they were perceived. While tensions remained, particularly in areas with long histories of strained relationships, there was a growing sense of possibility, a belief that things could improve if everyone kept working toward it. Lisa played a pivotal role in maintaining this fragile progress. She organized monthly town hall meetings, inviting both residents and officers to share updates, voice concerns, and celebrate successes. These gatherings weren't always smooth. Arguments occasionally erupted and old wounds resurfaced, but they served as a reminder that healing required patience and persistence. At one such meeting, an elderly woman stood up to speak. Her name was Mrs. Carter, and she had lived in the same neighborhood for over 40 years. "I've seen a lot of promises come and go," she began, her voice trembling with emotion. "But this feels different. For the first time, I feel like someone is actually listening, and that gives me hope." Her words brought applause from the crowd, bringing tears to Lisa's eyes. It wasn't just Mrs. Carter's sentiment that moved her. It was the realization that all their hard work was beginning to bear fruit. Change wasn't immediate, nor was it perfect, but it was happening. As autumn settled over the city, painting the streets in shades of gold and crimson, Mark found himself reflecting on how far he'd come since that fateful night. He no longer carried the weight of guilt as heavily as before, though he knew it would never fully disappear. Instead, he channeled that weight into action, using it as fuel to drive his commitment to reform. His colleagues noticed the change. In him, some inspired enough to join his efforts. Others remained skeptical, clinging to old habits and attitudes. But Mark understood that transformation wouldn't happen overnight. It was a gradual process requiring constant vigilance and effort. One evening, as he walked home from a community event, Mark spotted Lisa sitting on a park bench overlooking the river. She was scrolling through her phone, her expression thoughtful. Hesitating for a moment, he approached her cautiously. "Mind if I sit?" he asked. Lisa looked up, surprised but not unwelcoming. "Sure," she replied, scooting over to make room. They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching the water ripple under the moonlight. Finally, Mark broke the quiet. "I wanted to thank you," he said earnestly, "for giving me a chance to be part of this. I know I don't deserve it, but, well, I'm grateful." Lisa smiled faintly, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "Deserving has nothing to do with it," she said softly. "What matters is what you do with the opportunity. So far, you've been doing good work. Keep it up." Her words lingered in the cool night air, a gentle reminder of the journey ahead. Mark nodded, resolve strengthening within him. He knew the road to redemption would be long and challenging, but he also knew he wasn't walking it alone. Together, with Lisa, Robert, and countless others, they were building something stronger than fear or prejudice, something real, something lasting. The city had changed, not overnight and not perfectly, but in ways that mattered deeply to those who called it home. Months of hard work, difficult conversations, and small victories had begun to reshape the landscape, not just physically, with new community centers and murals celebrating unity, but emotionally, as trust slowly rebuilt between its residents and law enforcement. It was a fragile transformation, one that required constant care and vigilance, but for the first time in years, there was hope. Mark Delaney stood on the steps of City Hall one crisp winter morning, watching as a diverse crowd gathered for the unveiling of a memorial dedicated to victims of police misconduct. The monument itself was simple yet powerful, a bronze plaque inscribed with names, surrounded by flowers and candles placed by loved ones. Behind him, Lisa Thompson stood alongside her brother, Mayor Robert Thompson, their expressions solemn, but resolute. This day wasn't about celebration. It was about remembrance, accountability, and healing. As the ceremony began, Robert took the podium, his voice steady despite the weight of the occasion. "Today we honor those whose lives were cut short or forever altered because of failures within our system," he said, his gaze sweeping across the audience. "But this is more than a memorial. It's a promise that we will do everything in our power to ensure no family has to endure such pain again." His words resonated deeply, drawing murmurs of agreement from the crowd. Mark listened intently, his chest tightening with a mix of emotions. He hadn't known any of the individuals whose names were etched into the plaque, but he felt connected, to them nonetheless. Their stories were reminders of the consequences of unchecked bias and unchecked power, consequences he had once been complicit in perpetuating. Now, standing among people committed to change, he vowed silently to never return to that version of himself. When the ceremony ended, attendees lingered, sharing memories and exchanging hugs. Lisa moved through the crowd, offering comfort where needed. She stopped briefly to speak with Mark, her tone warm but firm. "This is just the beginning," she reminded him. "Don't forget why we're here." "I won't," Mark replied sincerely. "Not ever." In the weeks that followed, the city continued to evolve. The independent oversight committee established by Robert's reforms held its first public hearing, addressing complaints filed against officers. The process was far from perfect. Some cases dragged on longer than expected, and tensions occasionally flared, but it represented a critical step toward transparency. Residents who had once feared retaliation now felt empowered to speak up, knowing their voices would be heard. At the precinct, attitudes shifted incrementally. Officers trained in implicit bias and de-escalation techniques began applying what they'd learned on the job, leading to fewer confrontations and more constructive interactions with the community. Mark became a vocal advocate for these changes, mentoring newer recruits and encouraging his colleagues to embrace the evolving culture. Though resistance remained, some officers grumbled about political correctness or complained about added scrutiny. Mark refused to let negativity derail progress. One evening, during a late shift, Mark responded to a call about a domestic disturbance. Arriving at the scene, he found a young couple arguing loudly in front of their apartment building. Neighbors stood nearby, visibly uneasy. In the past, Mark might have immediately intervened aggressively, assuming the worst. But tonight, he approached calmly, introducing himself and asking if everyone was okay. The couple hesitated, surprised by his demeanor. "We're fine," the woman said after a moment, though her red-rimmed eyes told a different story. "Just having a bad night." Mark nodded understandingly. "I get it. Bad nights happen. But if you need someone to talk to, I'm here, or I can connect you with resources that might help." To his relief, the couple agreed to sit down and discuss their issues rather than escalate the situation. Later, as Mark drove away, he reflected on how differently things might have gone under old habits. By choosing empathy over authority, he had diffused a potentially volatile moment and earned the gratitude of the very people he served. Lisa, too, saw tangible results from her efforts. Through partnerships with local schools, she launched a program teaching students about civic engagement and advocacy. Young people like Jamal, whom Mark had mentored, became ambassadors for the initiative, sharing their experiences and inspiring peers to get involved. For Lisa, seeing these kids take ownership of their futures filled her with pride. They weren't just learning about justice, they were actively shaping it. By spring, the city buzzed with renewed energy. Community gardens sprouted in vacant lots, murals depicting themes of unity adorned previously gray walls, and block parties brought neighbors together in ways they hadn't in years. Even skeptics couldn't deny the positive shifts happening around them. Crime rates dropped slightly and surveys showed increased satisfaction with police-community relations. While challenges remained, deep-seated biases didn't disappear overnight. The progress was undeniable. On a sunny afternoon, Lisa and Robert met at a cafe near City Hall to reflect on everything they'd accomplished. "It's amazing how far we've come," Lisa said, stirring her coffee thoughtfully. "But sometimes I wonder, is it enough?" Robert leaned back in his chair, considering her question. "Enough isn't something we'll ever fully achieve," he admitted. "There will always be more work to do. But what matters is that we keep moving forward. Every step counts." Lisa nodded, smiling faintly. "You're right, and honestly, I think that's what keeps me going. The idea that even small actions can make a big difference." Across town, Mark sat on a park bench watching children play soccer under the watchful eyes of parents and volunteers. Among them was Jamal, laughing as he kicked the ball toward the goal. Seeing the boy's joy reinforced Mark's belief in the importance of persistence. Change didn't happen in grand gestures. It happened in moments like this, in laughter, connection, and shared humanity. As the sun set over the city, casting long shadows across its streets, the scars of the past still lingered, but so did the seeds of renewal. Through courage, compassion, and collective effort, the people of the city had proven that even the deepest divides could be bridged. One conversation, one action, one heart at a time. And though the journey ahead remained uncertain, they faced it together, united by a shared vision of a brighter future.